Effect has its origins in the Eastern Carteret County Collaborative, or ECC. A group of us, the Wave Effect has its origins in the Eastern Carteret County Collaborative, or ECC. A group of us came together and got funded by Smith Reynolds to increase community resilience here in Eastern Carteret. The initial focus was on building a collaborative partnership that would allow us to increase community resilience. And we ended up forming teams to address different needs for the partnership. And along the way, we had COVID. So we've realized that there's a need to increase our knowledge and skills so that we can have more collective leadership. And that's not really a type of leadership that most of us have had a lot of opportunity to practice. So the capacity building team, along with staff and our advisors, have taken input from different collaborators and from our work together so far to create the Wave Effect.
Whole endeavor was born out of Hurricane Florence, when so many of us realized that our communities have incredible strength and incredible people that can step up as needed, but also there are weaknesses, there are problems, and in the aftermath, there was unequal distribution of assistance. So together.
One of the interesting things that I think this group does is build capacity through connections. Those connections I find so exciting, basically giving people tools to go out and work together. And some of the tools are just connections between people and among organizations.
I would say because of our geographical distribution in Eastern Carteret, that this networking that is happening within this group is just incredibly important because of the distances between us and because of historical differences that have not allowed us to move towards uniting and moving as a group.
One of the conversations we had early on this summer about the origins of the wave effect was the fact that our real need is to make sure that we don't end up 3 years now down the line without this strong group of people who know each other both personally and in a volunteer work effort to move everybody's agenda along. It's critical, I think, to make sure that we're all able to step up and fill in the gaps when this grant.
You guys heard that high-pitched noise in the background. That was the wind howling that day when Susan was recording, or when we played that last clip. And I'd like to give a shout out to Bear, who's joining us today. Bear, I found a photo of you I wanted to include. Bear is here in 2019 when we first got started on this effort. So Bear, we're glad you're here today. I'd like to just take a few minutes to share with you a little bit about what everyone saw from a participant perspective coming through the Wave Effect. And it started with us reaching out to them by phone and asking people to participate. We did very targeted recruitment because we wanted to make sure that we were getting a diverse mix of people in terms of age, gender, race, experience, and geographic proximity, including where people were from, people that were from here, people that have lived here a long time, but also people that are new to the area. Each week each session, we had 7 sessions in total over a 7-month period. And the first interaction we actually had with people in person was when we were dropping off care packages for them, because this was a virtual format. So 7 sessions across 1 day a month for 7 months, and food ended up being a big factor in that. And on the first session, Lydian gave us this little taste of what the Wave Effect was about. So I'll share this with you here. These lenses, resilience, cultural difference, empowerment, and so on, each day of the leadership program, each session, 1 per month, had a different theme. And I just want to show you some slides just to kind of give you a feel for what it looked like. The first 6 sessions were on Zoom. So the session was an orientation, and you'll notice that the agenda was handwritten and sort of loose, and that was very intentional. There's a lot of trauma in this community, and so trying to use life-affirming colors and feel and flow. We used a mixture of small groups and gave a lot of focus on relationship building, because connection is another aspect of resilience. Resilience was so important that our second session was focused entirely on that. And it was set up in such a way as to create a lot of connection and levity and positive feeling and optimism. And we needed that because third session, we were going to start taking people into some harder conversations. There's a lot of conflict in our community. And so we're trying to create a space for people to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And believe it or not, this screenshot is actually people talking about what makes them get upset. And you can tell by the look on people's faces that that they were clearly getting comfortable with getting uncomfortable. That was a fishbowl exercise. We were all watching that on the screen while it happened. We also had small interactions here, and Lydian had mentioned Rick Morse from the School of Government was one of our advisors. He couldn't be here today, but he was it was a presence throughout. Our fourth session led us into talking about engagement. How do we actually work in the community to get voices? And we were able to tie this into an ongoing land use planning process that was happening at the time in the town of Beaufort. And so we actually used that process to inform our class in between sessions. The fifth session on empowerment, and one of the things that happened that day was we had a critical incident where our schools went into lockdown, and we had there was a mental health crisis that involved someone with guns, and it affected several of the people that were on the call with us in our session. We had teachers and parents and law enforcement officers who all started going off camera. And so we had to adapt and go off screen for a while, come back, and we used the resilience work that we had in the second session to help bring us all back into a space of connection and groundedness. It was a pretty intense session. So by the sixth session, which was intended to focus on systems change, we actually ended up focusing on that situation from a systems lens. And so we were able to unpack what happened in our community together using systems thinking to do how we were all interconnected and part of the situation. And we used different technologies in the process, including being able to move around the screen in a space called Kumo Space, which allowed us to kind of socialize after some of our sessions as well. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to some of the folks that actually participated to talk about our seventh session, and then also share what the experience was like from their perspective. And I'll be showing some photos from when we were in person while they're talking, just to give you a feel for what the experience was like when we shifted from Zoom to in person.
Before we do that, Patrice has a question in the chat. How did grounding in the arts become a part of the program, and why American Indian? I think I'm going to hold that when we talk about kind of behind the scenes.
I agree. Yeah.
Thank you.
So Justin and Susan and Penny, I'm going to hand this section over to y'all.
Oh, I just want to say it's a great opportunity to be here. And this is the first experience of this I've had in a long career of self-designed programming, and the influence and the strength of the advisors that were pulled in has just resounded through our community. And there's a strong excitement now, I believe, because of this, and a stronger connection. that has been made even on Zoom. The whole thing except that last session, which was a wonderful experience, was on Zoom. So, Justin?
Yes, I didn't know that I would be able to connect with people over Zoom and so deeply. It's still a deep connection. I was ready for the work that we were doing, but I wasn't prepared for what it was going to do to me. It was a strategic thing that happened. It led us in the middle of this thing that was happening. It completely tore me down and gave me elements to build myself back up, to switch my perspective on life. I came into it thinking that I knew things, that I had answers, but what I didn't realize was that I just had knowledge of my own experience. And those aren't taken away from me. It's just my experience. And so it gave me grace for other people that I didn't know that I didn't have. And so I'm just so grateful for this experience, because it wasn't a class and it wasn't a thing. It was a experience that I can't explain. And it's very spiritual for me, actually. And this is us at the Oyster House meeting in person. We actually did open space technology to plan that whole day, which I learned that day that I love open space technology. I can't remember what we spoke about, but it was some powerful things going on. And actually, Christy has some slides with some of the things that we actually did talk about earlier.
Before we get to that, Penny, is there something you'd like to add here?
Sure. Thank you very much to the leaders and the facilitators who brought us through this experience. I've been in community leadership for roles for many years, but I've never had a more worthwhile experience than this one. The connections that we built, the collaborations that were formed to accomplish things within the community will stick with us. It's a skill set that goes far beyond a standard agenda that you would get in a leadership class, and made stronger through those connections. The connections were against traditional boundaries that we see in our community that are usually very difficult to cross. But thanks to the humor, the snacks, the good times that we had together, the bridges were built and the bridges will stand. And I think one of the main things that I have learned in working differently through this systems thinking method is that you need to work with and through a community rather than going into a community and telling them, I'm here to do this for you. That's not the way to work. And it has really changed my whole attitude. So thank you to the group. Thank you to ZSR for funding it. And thank you to you all for listening today.
So you all have seen a bit about the impact on participants, and certainly heard about the snacks. We thought what we would do is give you a bit of a peek behind the curtain, so to speak, and thinking about it from the development side as advisors and staff, what we were going through in order to put these sessions forward. Christy, I think you have something to kick this part off.
Yes, I do. And I just want to say this is going to be a mixture of audio, video clips from during the time, so you can get a feel for what was actually going through the heads of our advisors in the moment. But we're also fortunate enough to have them here on the call. So we'll play some little video clips through here so you can see what was going on. And I think this will also be enlightening for our participants. But then we'll also have time to hear from our advisors specifically about how this was developed, and we can talk more as a group. So
and I would say if you have questions, this would be hold them, and we'll have a time at the end to address some of the questions.
Yeah, if they go in the chat, we'll be looking at them,
Yes.
but we'll bring them we'll answer them at the end.
came in and did our little piece, and here doing the same thing that we've done, that we are telling you to do, and that's connect with you, be with you throughout the process. So you see our faces, even when we're not on the main show, we're still here representing to support each other. So I think,
and we're working on our own stuff like you all outside of these sessions.
Came in and did our little piece and ran out and been done.
Met in between each session, but this started months before, where we met as an advisor team. So it wasn't just the School of Government at Chapel Hill, their advisors. We also had advisors from One Step at a Time Consulting. That was Forrest and Sylvia that you just saw, and they're on the call today. They have extensive experience in leadership development and community engagement, as well as an EDI lens. And Dr. Patrick Jeffs, who you'll see here in a little bit, as well as Rick and Lydian from the School of Government. So there were 5 of us together, that plus Barbara, who's on the call here, Barbara Garrity Blake, and myself, who were staff. And this 7 of us would meet to talk about what we were going to, what this thing was going to do. And we didn't even know what it was going to be called. We didn't know it was the wave effect. We didn't know exactly what it was going to be. It was an emergent process. But this screen here gives you kind of a flavor for like where we were headed. And as someone noticed, and I think Sylvie, you said the other day, like this was a fun process. We really enjoyed ourselves as we were going through it. But we had these Zoom calls, and in one of the Zoom calls, Patrick brings up this idea of a tool called Session Lab. And Session Lab is on the cloud, and it allows you to collaboratively develop a course. Now this is what the wave effect ended up looking like in Session Lab ultimately. But it wasn't how it started. We actually designed each session. After the first one, each of the following sessions weren't designed until the previous session had been completed. So in that time from the first Friday of the month in January, before the first Friday in February, we all got back together as advisors to plan out what the next session was going to look like based on what we had learned from the first session. So we had a general flow for what the sessions were going to be, but we didn't know the actual what each day looked like. And I'd like to share a few clips about that.
Well, and to that point, I think the way that we are staging all of this, I think the next session is going to go to some remarkable depths because all of this stuff is going to be on board. But and to that point, I think the way that we are staging.
There we go. So in addition, we applied a lot of adult learning things. So when you heard about, we also included tools for us to use to bring art into the space, to bring a way for people, especially since we're on Zoom, to bring a way for people to have movement. And we used these things throughout each session. And so each session kind of had a set of patterns designed to address different learning styles and different needs. Here's another little clip talking about how we've learned in the process.
In our prep meeting, I don't know, 3 weeks ago, about the journaling and how journaling, this was like revolutionary to me, just how impactful, and you just said it in the most simple way, but it like hit me in this really odd, transformative way of being mindful for like 2 minutes in journaling before going into a breakout, right? Because that is, so there's activation when you, right? So you get that activation and then you settle into yourself, right? Because to just get that and then go out is like, then people are like on and really highly activated and they're operating from a different place in their brain. And for the way that you encourage that, I mean, I'll do that for the rest of my life. So I also wanted to give you thanks for that, because through this activation and settling, through how we enter into connection, that is, I don't know, it was just so subtle and simple, but really transformative. So thank you for.
What did he say? I think Rick said just take a couple minutes to gather your thoughts. You know?
Well, and I wish I was sophisticated enough to have thought of it at that level. But for me, some of it is just as a introverted person myself, when I'm in settings where I'm told I've been processing all this information, now go talk about it. It just, like you, and now I know, now I have words to explain why that doesn't work for me.
So each session was really structured to try to bring about some psychosocial safety, to create a container in which we could go deeper and deeper with our participants. And so you got kind of a flavor from that last clip. And these sessions formed kind of a rhythm. But one of the things we also had to do was we had to be willing to stop short when the time was right. And so not only when we had the critical incident, we needed to flex, but there was also another session where we ended an hour and a half early, 2 hours early, because the learning had already been locked in. So with that, I'd like to stop and hand this over to the advisors to share their perspective.
Sylvia, would you like to say something?
Sure, Lydia. First of all, people have been kind of talking and inferring about something that I want to make sure that you guys really hear, and that this was not a prescribed program for Eastern Carteret County. This was a process, and the focus and emphasis was on building that process that is sustainable for all of the people in Eastern Carteret. It wasn't about us as advisors and what we bring to the table or what we know, but it was about us collaborating with them to help them take ownership of this. And that was what was the beauty of it. It was, and when Christy talks about how we stopped when it was appropriate, how we took the time out for them to process the shooting or the potential shooting and all of that stuff, it was because we wanted this to fit within their processes and the life that they live in Eastern Carteret County, which is different from Guilford County, in which I live in, or Raleigh, where you might live, or Chapel Hill, so we did that. And so our focus really was on process building. And Justin, I think you said it right, the experience, because this was truly a phenomenological event, and that's the best word I can think of, a lived experience for the people who participated as citizens and for us as advisors. So I think that what we're trying to do is share with you a lived experience that's almost impossible to share in words and clips and pictures without you having actually lived the experience. So I'll let somebody else jump in, Patrick or Lydian or Dr. Toms or somebody else.
I'll take the baton. And thank you for that, Sylvia. It was a pretty remarkable experience, and certainly something I've never experienced in my lifetime. I was brought on board through the resiliency lens. My background is in mental health and owned a trauma clinic here in Chapel Hill. And now I consult in primarily healthcare. But, what we were attempting to tackle from day one was basically trauma and race, right? And how to create a foundation within a community to heal from those two lenses. And that is not a small undertaking. And I can even sense my own emotion just saying that, knowing how far we've come with this group and with that community. And I would argue a relative short time. And I think, and this is some of the pieces that Sylvia was talking about, the advisors plus Christy and Barbara, our own ability to process as a microcosm of a community, right? And, we were all coming from very different lenses. We had the government and community lens and the DEI lens and my trauma lens. And for us to be able to process out our own group building experience, our own, I don't think we ever really had conflict per se, but certainly we had different ways of looking and approaching things. And to be able to move through all of that, I've never been a part of a advisory group that was willing to spend that amount of emotional energy to try to get this right. and Penny was talking about it, and Justin as well, about the experience. And our goal was to facilitate an experience, right? This was not a training anything. We were facilitating experience. And in my experience of our experience, just the depth that we as advisors had to go to imagine all of the different scenarios and to create scenarios and groups and pacing and timing of how that would play out, allowed us to better understand kind of imagining where the group needed to go and ultimately where the community needed to go. But it was to not have a plan really at any given time and to build that as we went really required a level of connection and communication that I've yet to experience in my career.
And Patrick, I think the ad that we could go back to, it was somebody had asked a question earlier about the variety of the arts and so forth. I think this is a perfect place to share how the arts fit into this. One, this community is big on the arts, period. I mean, you know, and you see it from reading to art to the land. I mean, everything, just the whole notion of Christy talking about life affirming colors and all of this stuff met us when we came to Eastern Carteret. So if you're going to create a collaborative, then the collaborative has to take into account who the people are. And I think that's how the arts fit in so well, the music, and it just free flowed, and it was such an appropriate thing to add into the context of this facilitated learning experience, that we could not have done this without incorporating the arts. And so I don't think it was so much about Native American as it was about, oh, here's a piece of art. We heard we heard piano, ukuleles, we heard, I mean, just all kinds of art, the physical drawing, the toys that people made, the gifts. I mean, so the arts came out in so many forms that you couldn't just pinpoint it and say, oh, well, we had a Native American focus or we had a African American focus. It was none of that. It was a very fluid thing depending on who had something that they were willing to bring to the table and would get comfortable coming out. Because some of these folks, this was like their experience of putting their stuff out there in front of a larger and bigger community audience. So I think that's how the arts fit into that as well.
And I would underscore that to say that, the people learn in a variety of ways. That was already mentioned. That was part of the intention, is to kind of hit people, meet people where they are. And so as we had included a couple of these things, I'll not forget a poetry piece that was read, and it was beautiful. And we came to find out that it was something that the participant herself had written. And so that was just revealing a side, as folks got more comfortable as the sessions went on, revealing a side that just didn't show up very often or very publicly. But in this group, the trust was built, and it emerged. There was a space for it to emerge. Mm-hmm. Didn't know, Forrest, if you had anything you wanted to add, or I feel like this is a good place for some questions potentially. So we've talked a lot, and we've put up a good amount of visuals, but I wasn't sure if there were particular questions about of the advisors in particular, or of the participants, either what was put out there or how was it experienced.
I think it's important to hear from Forrest. I didn't get to play much for him, and Forrest, I think you have such a good observational style. I think it would be helpful to just hear your thoughts.
Good morning. Yeah, I just thought the parallel learning dynamics and process of the advisor group and with the other teams. We had stuff we had to work through in terms of our own learning. I think, as Patrick was saying, and Lydia and Dr. Burgess, that then transferred into the community. The beauty is what we call, I guess, the delicate balance of the teaching, learning, experiential process that we all have to go through and we all went through. So as we grew and as our collective focus became much more balanced, we were able to then, I think, share all of that. And not just the cognitive, but it was you know when people feel you. And that's what happened. Eastern Carteret, they felt us, we felt them. We were able to make adjustments and grow. And I think that was the beauty of the process. And then when you look at it from the point of view of the advisors, that may be one of the biggest things to take away for us is that the width and through of our vision of what was going on, it came reflecting back to us that helped us all grow. And that's the beauty of it. Most of the time, people want to come in, as Dr. Burgess was saying, you can't prescribe reality. You can, but it usually don't work. But if you can describe a platform, describe a race, then people find themselves and identify themselves in it. And then we collectively come to a whole different place and point that we call create your own reality.
And there's an example, I think, that I'd like to offer. We have a wonderful clip, but unfortunately it's not working, of, Christy's mouthing something. Maybe it is working. Oh, it is working. So maybe we'll start with that. But there we want to move into this next sort of, so what? What difference has it made, for the folks, and what did they experience? We saw learning shifting, obviously, in the moment, in the classes. And this next clip is an example of an insight that was a very practical takeaway for one of our participants, who is a coach at the only high school down
with
east.
My staff and with my students that I have at the school, the with and through, not 2 and 4. I was thinking about with and through, and I wrote with and through being it empowers those around you, and 2 and 4 enables people around you. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I've been trying my best to do, not only as a coach, but a coach to the kids, but also as that head coach with my staff and with my kids at home as.
So in that example, BJ was able to actually take that with and through perspective, which was new for him, apply it to his relationships that he has with his coworkers, apply it with the kids that he is coaching, and also literally in his home life. So that was an example for us of just real-time application and practical application of some of the things that we were teaching.
So Lydian, at this point, you were wanting to share a little bit about the effects afterwards. So there were a lot of impacts that people experienced, both internally as well as a group, and things we could see in the group. We have since seen quite a few things. For example, we had a group put together an event. We also have had people helping with setting the direction of our overall collaborative. And we've also had people helping to bring other people into the collaborative, new people being brought into the collaborative. And then we also have had some experience sharing what we've done with other groups that are funded through Z. Smith Reynolds. So they actually took some of the techniques we used and applied them in another meeting. I'd love to let Barbara or anyone who participated that hasn't had a chance to speak to share about what you all see as the impacts.
Sure. Well, first, I just want to remark on the series of wave effect sessions happened over a 7-month period. But it was so powerful and had such amazing flow through each session that it was almost like they were consecutive days. We just started off with that, quickly had that trust to be vulnerable together. And I think that was so important. And to me, it really the most difficult session was talking about culture and cultural difference. And I think a lot of us were almost, well, like Justin said in the beginning, kind of rattled, kind of broken out of our typical way of thinking about things. And I could just feel, just being in this community for the next month until the next one, that there was just a lot of reflection, deep reflection going on after that session. And it was all by design. It was all thanks to our advisors. But once we came back, all that was contained, was supported. It's just an amazing transformation happened, I think, throughout the whole thing. But I just wanted to remark on the flow. And then beyond the wave effect, this idea of network leadership, the wave effect attendees are truly leaders and have engaged in our larger collaborative network. This picture here is about, it's our planning committee. We had a shrimp boil at the end, which had a real community feel. It was in the community of Gloucester. We brought in, that's my husband cooking. We brought in our family members. It had a cultural flavor. We were able to cook traditional dishes. Everybody brought dishes. We ate locally caught shrimp, which is a huge asset in our area. And I just can't emphasize enough that this was after 6 months of virtual connection. That 7th month was the first time, really, for many of us that we had been together physically. And so these, you will see, this is our larger collaborative, but these are our wave effect people in there taking a leadership role and helping shape the direction of our larger collaborative. And so it's joy and fun has been central to all of this. You can't force joy, but we certainly were able to create the conditions to give rise to joy, and rise it did.
Thank you, Barbara. Lydian, I think it would be nice to also see if anybody has any reactions from our audience. I'm feeling weird about this sort of presenting out because we're so used to being collaborative and interactive. And I don't know if anybody that's there has anything they'd like to say. But if you do, I would love to hear from you before we close out.
One of the things that I'd like to note about that last, I definitely, if you want to enter into the chat, that's an option as well. One of the things I'd like to note from that last session that struck me when we were talking about kind of what's happened since the wave effect in the last, I guess we're almost at a year, which seems almost unbelievable. But that there was a slide of folks that were gathering at the train station in Beaufort, the depot, the old depot. And what you'll know if you know the community is that there were some of the more traditional leaders, elected leaders, for instance, or managers that are in some of the community institutions that were there. And I could see that the wave effect graduates were actually influencing, in this picture here, were actually influencing the more the organizations that were the more traditionally thought of as leaders. And so I just thought that was of note as well, is that this really was grassroots influencing other organizations. And since then, that has been even more so happening with regard to bringing in people in the social service community from the county, from the various towns. Down East itself does not have any incorporated areas. And so there's no political authority in that space. But to the extent that there is in the larger community, these folks are now in a position to actually influence those more formal structures. And so I thought that was an important thing to note. At this point, I think we really kind of want to think about some reflections. And and I guess one question I wanted to ask folks was, has anything that you've seen here as participants influenced your thinking about the way in which you might view or plan to undertake any engagement efforts? So that's my question to participants.
I'd like to respond to that with some other people's comments. I asked a few other participants what they thought about it. What was their effect, or the effect of wave effect on them? And one person responded, this helped me reimagine leadership as a shared rather than a solo enterprise. And I certainly agree with that. The level of collaboration and working with and through was evident every session. And another person said, I'll always take with me the thoughtful, kind, creative, and truly collaborative approach to leading a group through uncharted territory when the goal is the journey itself. Those are just a few of the wonderful comments. Community was built and a sense of well-being, a sense that all was going to be okay because we were okay. The web of our connections in our community has begun to spin wide. I look forward to this web growing as people begin to catch the energy. And I look forward to watching people change. And I look forward to the change inside me as we look for new ways to connect, share, grow, and create shalom. I deeply long for this. Yeah. Just a few of the comments from people who couldn't be here today.
Well, and speaking of which, I think that there's an opportunity to talk a little bit about kind of what the impact was, even as advisors. I think that certainly we've hinted at some of that, but even some of the ahas that we've had. I know there's a clip of my colleague Rick Moore, since he couldn't be here today. This was, again, when we would meet, we would reflect on the session, we would plan the next session and think about how to connect one session to the next session, and think about what homework needed to happen for participants. But this was Rick reflecting on the session right after community engagement. And I think it's important to include this because as academics, we might have this one perspective of what we think engagement should look like and how it should happen. But this is Rick's reflection on that point.
I do a lot of work in this space on this topic, but it's always with people that are kind of on the formal organization end of things, like, you know, local governments in particular. And I was wondering how this topic would connect or feel real to, I don't know, can't come up with the right word, but, you know, how well it would resonate, you know, with the group here. And obviously it did very much. And it just sort of opened my eyes a lot that, you know, this is a universal deal here. It's not just the province of experts and professionals. And yet more often than not, there's a kind of a little echo chamber of those experts and professionals that talk about this, and we don't actually have these kind of conversations. So that's been really helpful and enlightening, and just it makes me wonder how we can break through.
Yeah, so that, I guess, is a little bit of a reflection and maybe even a challenge when you're thinking about community engagement and how to do that and how to do that effectively, what influence that will have on the folks you're hoping to engage with. But quite frankly, the other piece is, what influence might it have on you personally as folks wanting to do work in this space? And I'll say that one last thing, and other advisors may want to join in, but certainly this approach has given me an opportunity to really think about challenging some folks in local government to think a little bit differently about engagement. There are all kinds of reasons why local government should engage with their public, but often it is more just from local government perspective out to the public, instead of really thinking about how this might land, where are the assets, what work might need to be done to uncover those assets, And so this is an example of, you heard this again and again, leading with and through. And this is a class that Christy and Sylvia are going to be offering in September through the School of Government for our clients, harnessing the potential of public participation. So just wanted to say that this has really, I think, influenced my view somewhat, and I hope others as well. I know we're at time, and I want to just say again, thank you to everyone who has joined to help me tell this story of the experience. Little did we know that the wave effect was aptly named. It wasn't a class per se, it was an experience, and I hope that you got a taste of that today.